Colorado Territory, 1871. Grace Hartwell stood at the edge of her father's homestead, watching the endless horizon where the Rocky Mountains met the vast prairie. At 22, she had seen enough of frontier life to know its harshness. The daughter of a doctor who had passed away the previous winter, Grace had inherited both his modest cabin and his healing knowledge. Her chestnut hair, typically pinned neatly beneath a bonnet, now blew freely in the spring breeze as she gathered herbs from her small garden. "A woman alone has no future out here," her father's voice echoed in her memory. The neighboring families had made it clear they expected her to return east to her mother's family or marry one of the local farmers by summer's end. But Grace believed differently. She had watched her father save countless lives, had assisted him through epidemics, childbirths, and gunshot wounds. The frontier needed healers more than it needed wives. "I don't need a husband to survive," she whispered to herself, tucking a wayward strand of hair behind her ear. "I just need to prove I can manage on my own." Her blue calico dress swirled around her ankles as she knelt to gather more yarrow for her dwindling supplies. Yet in the quiet moments, when the cabin creaked with loneliness and the coyotes howled across the prairie, Grace wondered if survival alone was enough. The homestead felt emptier each day without her father's reassuring presence. Still, she remained convinced that independence was her only protection in this unforgiving land. As the morning sun climbed higher, Grace noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Squinting against the glare, she made out the silhouette of a horse moving erratically. The rider seemed to be slumped forward, barely holding on. "Something's wrong," she murmured, dropping her basket and hurrying toward the approaching figure. The horse staggered closer, its flanks covered in lather, and Grace could now see the rider was a young man, his shirt darkened with blood. As the horse reached her fence line, the man slipped sideways, tumbling to the ground with a dull thud. Grace rushed forward, her heart pounding. The man lay motionless, face down in the dirt. When she carefully turned him over, she found herself looking at a handsome face, no older than 25, now pale beneath a light stubble. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and blood soaked through his torn shirt. "Can you hear me?" she asked, checking his pulse. His eyelids fluttered open briefly, revealing startling blue eyes. "Indians," he whispered, before losing consciousness again. With practiced efficiency, Grace assessed his wounds, a deep gash across his shoulder and what appeared to be an arrow wound in his side, the shaft broken off. He had lost considerable blood, but the wounds themselves might not prove fatal if infection could be prevented. "You picked the right homestead to collapse at, Cowboy," she muttered, struggling to drag him toward her cabin. "Doctor's daughter might be the only thing keeping you alive today." By nightfall, Grace had extracted the arrowhead, stitched both wounds, and managed to get some water down the unconscious man's throat. His fever raged as she applied cool compresses to his forehead. "Please don't die," she whispered, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern for this stranger. "I've had enough death for 1 year." 3 days passed with Grace barely sleeping, constantly monitoring her patient's fever, changing bandages, and coaxing broth between his cracked lips when he showed moments of consciousness. On the 4th morning, she awoke in her chair beside the bed to find those blue eyes open and watching her. "Am I dead?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Grace straightened, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Not yet, though you certainly tried your best." "An angel wouldn't be so sharp-tongued," he murmured with the ghost of a smile. "I'm Hank Foster. Might I know the name of my savior?" "Grace Hartwell. My father was the doctor in these parts." "Was?" Hank asked, attempting to sit up before wincing in pain. "He passed last winter. Pneumonia." Grace pressed him gently back against the pillows. "You shouldn't move. That arrow nearly found your lung." Hank's gaze sharpened. "The others, did anyone else make it?" Grace shook her head. "You arrived alone." "What happened?" His jaw tightened. "Cattle drive to Denver. We were cutting through the foothills when a band of Cheyenne attacked. They'd been raided by soldiers last month, out for revenge. I got separated." His voice faltered. 8 men. Good men. "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. "A man has no business surviving when his friends don't," Hank said, turning his face away. "Better had I died with them." In those words, Grace recognized a familiar pain, survivor's guilt, the same that had haunted her after her father's death. "Rest now," she said, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Blame can wait until you're stronger." Over the next week, Hank's body began to heal faster than his spirit. Grace learned he was 26, born in Missouri, and had been working cattle since he was 14. He spoke little of his past beyond that, and she didn't pry. The West was full of men running from something, and she had her own secrets to keep. "You've got skilled hands," Hank observed one afternoon as Grace changed his bandages. "Where did you learn?" "My father taught me everything he knew," she replied, carefully applying a salve to the healing wound. "He believed women made better healers, more patient," he said. "And what did your mother think of that?" Grace's hands stilled momentarily. "She returned east after my brother died of fever. Said the frontier was no place for women or children. I stayed with father. And now you're here alone." It wasn't a question, but an assessment. "Not everyone needs protecting, Mr. Foster." He caught her wrist gently. "I didn't suggest you did, Miss Hartwell. But every soul needs company, especially in these parts." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared solitude that neither acknowledged aloud. As May turned to June, Hank grew stronger. He began helping around the cabin, first with small tasks that wouldn't strain his healing wounds, then gradually taking on more. Grace found herself enjoying his company more than she cared to admit. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Hank broke their comfortable silence. "I should be moving on soon. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Grace felt an unexpected pang at his words. "Where will you go?" "Don't rightly know," he admitted. "The outfit I rode with is gone. I've saved enough for a small stake. Maybe try my hand at my own place someplace quieter." "You could stay," Grace suggested before she could stop herself. "Just until harvest. I could use the help with the garden, and you could use more time to heal properly." The look Hank gave her was complicated, grateful yet troubled. "Folks will talk, Miss Hartwell." A young woman alone with a man not her husband. "Folks already talk," she interrupted. "They've been waiting for me to fail since father died. What's one more thing for them to gossip about?" Hank stayed. Together they repaired the sagging fence, expanded the garden, and even added a room to the small cabin. Grace found herself laughing again for the first time in months. Hank proved to be not just strong but clever, with a dry humor that caught her by surprise. When July brought a wave of influenza to the nearest town, Grace was called to help the overwhelmed local midwife. Hank insisted on accompanying her, driving the wagon while she gathered her medicines. "These people don't trust me yet," she warned him as they approached the town. "They tolerated father because they needed him, but a woman healer is different." "Then they're fools," Hank replied simply. For 3 days, they worked tirelessly. Grace moved from bedside to bedside, while Hank fetched water, chopped wood for fevered households, and carried messages. She watched with quiet admiration as he held crying children to comfort them while their parents were treated, his large hands surprisingly gentle. On their return journey, exhausted but satisfied with their work, Hank suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop beside a flowering meadow. "What is it?" Grace asked, alarmed. Without answering, Hank hopped down and extended his hand to help her. "Come see." In the center of the meadow stood a perfect circle of wild columbines, their blue petals vivid against the green grass. "My mother used to say fairy rings bring luck," he said softly, leading Grace into the circle. Standing amid the flowers, Grace felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "Hank, before I came here, I believed a man out west survives by trusting no one," he said, taking her hands in his. 8 years riding lonely trails taught me to keep moving, keep silent, never put down roots." His voice roughened. "But you show me different. You heal not just wounds, but souls, Grace Hartwell." Her heart thundered in her chest. "I was so determined to prove I could survive alone, to need no one. And can you? Survive alone?" "Yes," she whispered, then added, "but I'm finding I don't want to." Their first kiss, surrounded by wild columbines under the vast Colorado sky, felt like coming home after a long journey. When they returned to the cabin that evening, something had fundamentally changed between them, a future neither had dared imagine now taking tentative shape. As summer ripened toward autumn, their happiness seemed complete. Hank proved himself not just to Grace but to the surrounding homesteaders, who gradually began to accept her as their healer with him by her side. They spoke of marriage when the harvest was in, of building a proper surgery room for her practice. Then came the letter, delivered by a passing cattle driver. Hank read it with a darkening expression before crumpling it in his fist. Grace, returning from delivering a neighbor's baby, found him packing his few belongings. "What's happened?" she asked, her stomach knotting with dread. "I have to leave," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Why? What was in that letter?" His shoulders sagged. The past catching up, like it always does. Finally, he turned to face her. "There's a marshal looking for me in Denver. The letter was from an old friend warning me." Grace felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. "Are you a wanted man?" "It's not what you think," Hank said quickly. 2 years back, I got in a fight with a man who was beating a saloon girl. He drew first, but he was the mayor's cousin. I've been running since." "So you killed a man," Grace said quietly. "A man who deserved killing," Hank confirmed, his expression hardening. "But the law doesn't always care about right and wrong out here. Just who has money and influence." Grace tried to process this revelation. The gentle man who had held fever-racked children, who kissed her each morning like she was precious. A killer? "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. "I wanted to start fresh," he admitted. "Thought maybe the past could stay buried." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Grace, please understand. I can't stay and bring trouble to your door." "So you're just leaving? After everything?" "It's the only way to protect you." Grace felt anger surge through her grief. "I never asked for your protection. I asked for your honesty, your partnership. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought we were building something real." "It is real," he insisted, desperation in his eyes. "More real than anything I've known. But the marshal won't stop until he finds me. And when he does, they'll hang me without a trial. Then we'll fight it. There must be witnesses, people who saw what happened, all scattered to the four winds by now." Hank took her hands, which she allowed despite her anger. "I love you, Grace Hartwell. Enough to walk away rather than watch them drag me from your home in chains." That night, after Hank had ridden away in darkness, Grace wept until she had no tears left. Then, with the same methodical care she applied to healing wounds, she packed her medical bag and a single carpet bag of essentials. By dawn, she was on the trail to Denver. The city sprawled dirty and chaotic compared to her quiet homestead. Grace had visited only twice before with her father, but she remembered enough to find the marshal's office, her heart pounding as she approached the weathered building. The man behind the desk had the hard eyes of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker nature. "Marshal Jenkins," his nameplate read. "What can I do for you, miss?" he asked, barely glancing up from his paperwork. "I'm looking for information about a wanted man," Grace said, willing her voice to remain steady. "Hank Foster." The marshal's attention sharpened. "What's your interest in Foster?" "I'm a doctor, a healer," she corrected herself at his skeptical look. "He was injured on my property. I need to know what kind of man I helped." Jenkins studied her face for a long moment before pulling out a wanted poster. Hank's likeness stared back at her, offering a $500 reward. "Murder and theft," the marshal said flatly. "Theft?" Grace echoed, confused. Hank had mentioned the killing, but nothing about stealing. Took off with $5,000 in mining company payroll after shooting Henry Blackstone. Something didn't add up. "Did you investigate the circumstances?" "I heard it was a fair fight, that Blackstone drew first." Jenkins snorted. "That what Foster told you? Convenient story when the only witnesses were saloon girls and drunks." He leaned forward. "Miss, I don't know what tale that silver-tongued devil spun, but Hank Foster is a dangerous man. Blackstone was unarmed when Foster shot him, then robbed the payroll office where Blackstone worked." Grace felt ill. Had she been completely deceived? The Hank she knew seemed incapable of such cold-blooded actions. And the saloon girl? The one Blackstone was beating. Something flickered across Jenkins' face. "What saloon girl?" "The one Hank said Blackstone was hurting when they fought." The marshal's expression shifted subtly. "Never heard that part of it." For 3 days, Grace remained in Denver, methodically tracking down anyone who might remember the incident. Most doors closed in her face, but persistence eventually led her to a small boarding house where she found Molly Chun, the saloon girl in question, now working as a seamstress. "Why are you dredging this up?" Molly asked warily. "It's better left buried." "Because a man's life depends on the truth," Grace replied. "Please, what really happened that night?" Molly's shoulders sagged. Blackstone was a monster, but protected by his cousin. He'd hurt girls before. That night, he caught me alone, said I owed him. She swallowed hard. Foster intervened. There was a struggle. Blackstone drew first, but Foster was faster. And the missing payroll money. Blackstone had been skimming from it for months. When he died, his cousin needed a scapegoat. Foster was convenient. Molly's eyes met Grace's. Your cowboy killed a man, that's true. But he saved my life doing it, and he never stole a cent. Armed with this testimony and similar accounts from 2 other witnesses she'd tracked down, Grace returned to Marshal Jenkins. You've been remarkably persistent, Miss Hartwell, he observed as she laid out her evidence. Justice demands persistence, she countered. Will you drop the charges? Jenkins sighed heavily. It's not that simple. The mayor's still pushing for blood, and technically, Foster did kill a man. A man who was trying to kill him and had assaulted multiple women, Grace pressed. That's self-defense and defense of others. The theft charge is fabricated. Even if I believe you, and I'm not saying I do, I can't simply dismiss this. Foster would need to stand trial. With a guarantee of fair proceedings, Grace insisted. No lynching, no rigged jury. Jenkins studied her with newfound respect. You care for him. I love him, she corrected. But this isn't about my feelings. It's about what's right. After a long pause, Jenkins nodded slowly. I can guarantee a fair trial, but I need Foster to surrender himself voluntarily. I'll bring him in myself, Grace promised. But I want your written assurance of safety and these witnesses' testimonies entered into official record immediately. When Grace returned to her homestead 2 weeks later, she found it occupied. Hank sat on her porch steps, unshaven and haggard, as though he hadn't slept since leaving. I couldn't stay away, he said simply as she approached. Thought I'd check on the place. Make sure you were all right before moving on. And where would you go? She asked quietly. Montana, maybe. Or up to Canada. His eyes searched her face. Where have you been, Grace? I've been half out of my mind with worry. Denver, she answered, watching his expression freeze. Denver, he repeated. You went to the marshal. Yes. Hank closed his eyes briefly. I never stole that money, Grace. I swear on my life. I know, she said softly. I found witnesses who confirmed your story. The marshal has agreed to a fair trial with their testimony. Hope and disbelief warred across his features. Why would you do this? Put yourself at risk for me. Grace took his hands in hers. Because I believe in healing, Hank. Not just bodies, but lives. Justice. Communities. She squeezed his fingers. And because I love you too much to let you spend your life running. Even knowing I've killed a man? To protect someone who couldn't protect herself, Grace said firmly. That's not murder. That's being the kind of man this frontier needs more of. The trial in Denver lasted 3 days. Grace sat in the courtroom each day, enduring whispers and stares as Molly and the other witnesses testified. When the jury returned with a verdict of justified homicide and dismissed the theft charges entirely, she wept with relief. Hank found her outside the courthouse, his face alight with a freedom he'd not known in years. Without a word, he dropped to one knee on the dusty street. Grace Hartwell, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my life twice over, once with your healing hands and once with your belief in me. I vow to spend the rest of my days loving you, protecting you, and being worthy of the chance you've given me. Will you marry me? Their wedding took place that autumn, with the aspens turning gold against the mountains. The small church in town filled with neighbors, and even a few patients Grace had treated during the influenza outbreak. Marshal Jenkins himself attended, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. You were right about him, he murmured to Grace at the reception. I've been doing this job 20 years, and I've rarely seen a clearer case of a man reformed by love. Grace watched Hank across the room, laughing with the blacksmith's children. He wasn't the only one reformed, she admitted. I was so determined to need no one, to prove I could survive alone. And now I understand that surviving isn't enough. She smiled. We're built for connection, even out here in the wild. Maybe especially here. By the following spring, the Hartwell Foster homestead had transformed. They'd expanded the cabin to include a proper surgery space where Grace continued her healing work. Hank had purchased a small herd of cattle and built up the neglected fields into productive farmland. On warm evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Grace would rest her head against Hank's shoulder, his arm around her waist, her hand cradling the gentle swell of their first child growing beneath her heart. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked one such evening. "When you were shot and bleeding, riding up to a stranger's door?" "Never," Hank admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was certain the West had no place for love, only survival. I thought I'd die alone under some endless sky. And now," he placed his hand over hers on her belly, feeling their child's movement. "Now I know better. The frontier isn't just about enduring hardship. It's about building something worth fighting for." His voice softened. "You taught me that, Grace. You healed more than my wounds. And you showed me that independence doesn't mean isolation," she replied. "That needing someone doesn't make you weak." As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but a profound healing. Proof that even in the harshest wilderness, the human heart could find its home.